200 kilometers from Chicago, on the shores of Lake Michigan, lies Racine, Wisconsin. The offices of the Johnson Company, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, are one of the American architect's greatest masterpieces. On June 4, 1937, an elderly architect stood before a cohort of inspectors from the Federal Technical Commission. He had been hired to build the offices of a company that specialized in household products, and he had come up with a totally original project. He had designed a large office area with 60 reinforced concrete columns, hollow on the inside and 6.5 meters high. Their base would taper to a diameter of just 22 centimeters. Their tops would spread out to cover the building. A technical feat that seemed unrealistic and even dangerous to the Commission's engineers, who were determined to rein in the 70-year-old architect's flights of fancy. They had demanded a full-tail skest. The column had to bear a 6-ton weight at its summit, but they would only be reassured if it could support twice that. Hib Johnson, who commissioned the project, had already spent a great deal of money. His credibility and that of his architect were at stake. "6 tons. 12 tons. The column held up. A coup de théâtre. The architect ordered more weight to be added, more and more. Cut to the quick by the wariness of the technicians who had doubted his talent, he didn't want to leave it at that. The column was now bearing 60 tons on its crown. They say that the old man struck it with his cane and that the whole thing collapsed at last. Footage doesn't confirm this feat, but that doesn't matter. The technique was perfect, the legend was underway, and the Johnson Wax building would soon be built. On its completion, the press hailed this tour de force. The building became the symbol of a powerful and innovative America. In May 1938, the editorialist of Life magazine expressed his enthusiasm. "This building is like a woman swimming naked in a river, fresh, slippery, and musical in her movement and her attitude." The interior of an office building like a woman swimming naked in a river? Yes, that's it. Wright has invented the office of the future, added the columnist of American Business. As for the architect himself, he wrote, "It requires someone fully developed to appreciate this building in its entirety. Technically, in the field of the scientific art of architecture, it's one of the most remarkably successful constructions in the world. I like it. They like it." The first thing that strikes the visitor to the building is the intensive use of the word family. The protective family, the cult of work. Religion isn't far away. The Johnson family has been making wax and other household products since 1886. In 1935, Hib Johnson, the young heir, was 36. He wanted to give the company a modern image and build new offices for his employees. Posterity has cast in bronze the encounter between the industrialist and the architect, who was to interpret the ambitions of Johnson Wax and Son. At the turn of the 1930s, Wright was living a reclusive life in the country, teaching architecture to a group of disciples. He was famous throughout the world, but as he neared 70, his career seemed to be over. He had built only 2 houses in the last 7 years, and he was almost broke. He was known above all for his houses integrated within the landscape. But for some time, he had been drawing and redrawing the plans of an ideal city. Until the end of his life, he would dream of the city of the future, a utopian return to the pioneer prairie where nature would form a constant environment. Wright was in this state of mind when on July 20th, 1936, Hib Johnson, a man half his age, came to see him and asked him, check in hand, to build an office building on the rubble of part of his old factory. An office building in an ugly and unhealthy suburb. The offer didn't immediately inspire the architect, who initially suggested building a vast city shrouded in greenery in the countryside, away from the town. Johnson refused. Wright's wife was able to talk her husband round. Wright had to imagine a building that was located, as he put it, in the heart of a totally worthless setting. For this reason, he would give the building the appearance of a fortress. No windows, blank facades, long brick walls, space rolled in on itself. A fort deliberately cut off from its surroundings. A long, low profile that allowed the architect to stress the horizontality that he loved, far from the fashionable skyscrapers that he abhorred. My idea was that the horizontal lines of a building, the lines parallel to the ground, identified with the ground and made the building belong to it. The old architect managed to convince the young company chairman, who told his entourage, the deal was signed. It concerned only the offices. A tower and additional premises would be added 10 years later. The architect started by imposing a discreet and almost secret main entrance. Too bad for usual practice, too bad for the pride of Johnson Wax. Wright considered that the whole building should be the symbol of the company, not just the traditional street facade. You have to move around and admire this apparently impenetrable building in order to gain entrance. There is no opening on the facade along the main street. You have to persevere. The sole entrance lies on the west side. It's a garage entrance. For Wright, by 1936, the car was part of architecture and conditioned space and movement. Still in your car, but already in the heart of the building. The garage ceilings are low, like a cave with its light sources and mysterious outlines. The pedestrians, if there are any in this futuristic world, would have to use the parking area to attain the sole entrance that is located within the building itself. An obligatory and narrow passageway. You have to slow down. The reception area inspires contemplation and even meditation. We finally discover the full scope of the largest room in the building, the Cathedral of Work. "200 people work here on an equal footing, without partitions, corridors, or different levels, in a central open space, A rectangle 45 meters by 65, around which the whole building is organized and revolves. Everyone can move around freely, from the accountant's department to the legal department, from international sales to personnel management. A mezzanine attached to the columns surrounds the entirety of the main room. This is the department manager's area, overlooking to the staff. The sounds of the outside world do not reach the employees. Cork on the ceilings and sand sprayed onto the concrete columns absorb the noise. Wright promised his client a building where each person will feel they're in a pine forest, breathing good air and bathed in light, within a hermetically sealed building. A person working can only see his colleagues at their desks. No looking out the window, since there aren't any. No other view than the room itself. The light comes from above. This vast building is, in its entirety, light and plastic. Up there, where there could have been a cornice, is an open grove filled with glass. The reinforcing frame is mainly hammered, welded metal. His considerations on light led the architect to make the ceiling and lateral walls independent. Here he wins his battle against right angles that vanish completely. A gap rather than a window, a broken and annihilated right angle. The clerestory welcomes the light of day. Electricity takes over when necessary to regulate the lighting of the main office. In Wright's project, the light of day should also have flooded in from the ceiling, from the gaps between the mushroom columns. The pillars placed at regular intervals make up this rather domesticated forest invented by the architect. Their enlarged tops provide cover. Through their sheer number, these mushroom columns create a ceiling as well as a roof. But Wright had to accept leaving the electric light on continuously, set into the ceiling. Too much sunlight dazzled the staff. A gray sky could spoil the whole effect. Water would stagnate on the roof and a snowfall could darken the whole room. He had to install protective covers that provide access to the electrical system. The main characteristic of the building is the simple repetition of frail and hollow monolithic rods that rise up as if on tiptoe from small brass shoes set into the floor. Since the concrete posts are not dependent on the floor, great flexibility is possible should the building move. Johnson wax is earthquake-proof, should such an event ever occur in the region of the Great Lakes. But Hib Johnson deserved the best. Throughout the building, the columns follow the same principle. If we remove the protective grating, we can see inside one of them. While examining the structure of a Californian cactus, the forms of the natural world again, Wright hit upon the idea of making reinforced concrete with a structure of open steel mesh rather than rods, an innovation that enabled him to reduce the thickness of the pillars. The hollow, shell-like columns are able to conceal electrical and telephone wiring. Wright would adapt this basic principle form according to their use and location. Trees, clearings, roots and flowers fill offices, loggias, meeting rooms, and garages. He claimed that he had invented an organic form of architecture. The building is a body, and moreover, it breathes through nostrils. His collaborators say that the ideas came to him quickly, but that it took him a long time to explain the geometry of the building. He would often change details at the last minute, and his frequent improvisations made life hard for the engineers and construction foremen. Because of a higher ideal of simplicity, this building was necessarily going to be a demanding work. And over a fairly long period, I acted like a pregnant woman. There were daily headaches, the well-known power of the Racine unions, the professional builders' codes that were followed to the letter locally. People say that we don't get on, but I've never had any trouble with Hib Johnson, although towards the end he did complain a little as the inevitable occurred and the building originally planned continued to grow. The project ended up costing 4 times the original estimate. Hib Johnson gradually sank the company's capital into it as the board looked on, paralyzed. The main reason was that the building was designed as a prototype where one technical feat follows another. There are Pyrex tubes throughout the building. Wright was the first to use them for architectural purposes. He borrowed the idea from the chemical industry and had kilometers made of them. They would need to be replaced over the years by plexiglass for reasons of insulation and fragility. The tubes were glued together horizontally and hung from the aluminum frames by wires. Wright was charmed by their roundness, the same love of curves, and by the quality of light that they provided. There was no uniformity. He played on varying thickness or placed them at different heights to vary the effect. Pyrex preserves privacy by offering light without transparency. Instead of windows or opaque partitions, we find these translucent tubes. At times, slightly unreal shapes can be made out. The outside world appears confusing and unsettling. Each employee would find balance at his or her desk. For Wright, the decor was a blend of architecture and furniture. He designed 48 pieces, tables, desks, lamps, and file cabinets. He chose the color tones that are all variations on the famous Cherokee red, the red of the bricks, the furniture, the carpeting, the lift gates. According to Johnson's calculations, the staff's pleasure at working in this setting and the new organization of the company's services increased efficiency by about 25%. Hib Johnson, an astute manager, also took care of his staff's social and cultural life. An auditorium was designed for them above the reception area, sheltered behind a row of plants. Painstakingly designed, with a ceiling like a cascade, or possibly a host of flying saucers, the auditorium is a cafeteria and a meeting place for the whole staff. It is also used for shows, plays, singing, and lecture and film screenings. The architect had even planned to install a monumental organ on the mezzanine above the main office, but Johnson rejected the idea out of hand. Even so, the collective spirit has limitations. It seemed implausible to place the management and upper executives at the end of the large office room. Bronze lifts, bird cages as Wright would call them, stop at every floor above the reception area. These narrow, refined cars, designed by the architect in person, weren't for the use of the staff in general. Only Johnson, his closest collaborators, and their honored guests had access to the management floor. The executives could just make out the main office room from the reception atrium and then walk to their offices or the meeting room. Opposite stands Johnson's office. It's the only part of the building with an opening onto the exterior and a private balcony. The building was completed in 1938, and its inauguration was a triumph. The main thing that the American public praised was the beauty of a building streamlined like the body of a car, the fuselage of a plane, or the hull of a ship. It was fashionable. It was high time that the starving American public was given something streamlined and aerodynamic, so swift and sure of itself that anyone could see the virtues of what people called modernity, clearly displayed in this building. 5 years went by. Business had never been so good for the Johnson Company, and it was raining in the main office. The water tightness needed to be corrected. What of that? Johnson had to grow again. A new research lab was required. Illustrators immortalized this second meeting between the two men. Johnson immediately warned Wright. Wright listened absently and responded with a project that was inspired by his love of Japan, an elegant little tower in the middle of an inner courtyard. The company chairman allowed himself to be convinced again. He didn't know that the initial estimate would triple. Wright's main idea was to sink a 50-meter-high central column 15 meters into the ground. A concrete core on which the rest of the building would be balanced. Each level is designed according to the same principle. All the floors are cantilevered, some to the wall, others, between floors, are circular mezzanines hanging in midair. The outer walls bear only their own weight. The facade, with its rounded angles, would, like the rest of the building, be made of bricks and pyrex, no less than 28 kilometers of tubes. The backbone of the tower, the central core, is a shaft carrying air, electricity, water, stairs, and even a lift. No monumental entrance here either. The small doorway in the courtyard leads only to a technical control room. Rising above a new garage, the tower is installed alongside the office building as part of the whole. Therefore, the main entrance has to be found within the building itself, at the end of some office or other. Wright imposed his idea. The premises had to be linked to each other so that no one would ever need to leave the increasingly large building. In 1980, the tower had to be shut down for nonconformity with safety requirements. But even standing empty, the tower continues as an image of the renown of Johnson Wax.
This unique tower of glass rising over Racine, Wisconsin, is the research center for Johnson's Wax, where science and industry work together to make housekeeping easier for 42 million American homemakers. In this tower is the Johnson Laboratory, where scientists test and blend many kinds of wax.
The building became the company's corporate image. Frank Lloyd Wright's genius was sold with the same conviction as a tin of wax. Architecture and household products were henceforth inseparable. The building itself became the theater of the Johnson Company's ideas. Family, religion, work, free enterprise. With the Johnson Wax Building, Wright's career found a new lease of life. He would never cease working. When he died in 1959 at the age of 90, he was still hard at work. Hib Johnson would survive him by 20 years. His board had feared that he would lead the company into its ruin with his massive building project. But in fact, he made it the triumphant emblem of a multinational company with a $5 million annual profit. And now the whole building stands there, earthquake-proof, fire-proof, noise-proof, and vermin-proof, almost idiot-proof. Most people see enough of it to be delighted, to be envious, or to go mad. There's no other possible escape from the building.